This is the Capitol Rundown.
Over 600 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since the ceasefire began.
It gives Congress the ability to review them and to overturn them if they're especially egregious.
And Republicans have a really difficult time shedding kind of that primary albatross and pivoting to independence in the general election.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Jorma Duran. From Lansing to Washington, D.C., there's always a lot happening in Michigan politics, so let's get started. Northern Michigan lawmakers are now demanding answers surrounding the death of a person at an immigration and customs enforcement detention facility in Lake County. Two members of the state's congressional delegation, both Democrats, took a trip there looking for an explanation. They also wanted to know more about ICE operations in general. Jody Mason has more on why those lawmakers say more transparency is needed.
Unfortunately, the outreach that Congresswoman Scholten and I made to our Department of Homeland Security Secretary, Kristi Noem, went unanswered around the death of Mr. Ganchev.
Nako Ganchev died at the facility back in December. ICE said the 56-year-old died of natural causes. U.S. Representatives Haley Stevens and Hillary Scholten, both Democrats, said since their message to Noem went unanswered, they decided to come see for themselves. They said they were given a tour as if they were coming in as a detainee. Both reps said it was a planned visit, so it's hard to tell what the facility is like on a day-to-day basis.
The facility today was clean. It was individuals were getting their meals on time. We heard from individuals who said that they were getting everything that they needed.
The Congresswoman did say they spoke with one man who didn't think he was getting the medical attention he needed and spoke with another man who was afraid of retribution for describing being in what was known as the hole, similar to solitary confinement for weeks.
He spoke of being, kept in a freezing room where he couldn't feel his toes and, having his food just thrown into his cell. So these are things that we really need to take seriously. The bunking situation is two to a room, and then there's a central room where about 100 people who are in that pod.
They say although close to 100 people signed up desperate for help, they were only able to meet with 4 of them, and their time was reduced from 3 to 2 hours.
Secretary Noem, for her actions at DHS. I, along with over 150 of my colleagues, believe that she is unfit for her role, that she has failed the American public.
The lawmakers said they are demanding change. Representative Stevens is calling for Noem's impeachment. They said they plan to come back and make follow-up visits in the future.
And coming up on the Capitol Rundown, Michigan Republicans running for office still want the president's endorsement, but find out why some say it won't mean as much this time around. And housing affordability is the focus of a new bipartisan proposal at the state capitol. That story and a whole lot more when we come back. Welcome back. Since the beginning of the Trump administration, more and more attorneys representing immigrants are using what are known as habeas corpus cases. In the last year, lawyers filed more than 850 of those here in Michigan. Of those, 733 were in the Western District. Nicole Tam has more.
The legal community that represents immigrants have had to resort to this constitutional protection of the habeas corpus petition, which was used sparingly before this administration, to now file them on an almost daily basis.
For people who can't afford representation, they could be held in the detention center for months, even if they choose to leave the country.
From a constitutional, this is America, this is the United States of America point of view, that should be scary to everybody.
The numbers in West Michigan are high. Alvarez says it's because of activity at North Lake Processing Facility in Baldwin. ICE data from earlier this month shows that facility has more than 1,400 people in custody. Only 10% of them are criminal cases.
Individuals that were picked up in Chicago, for example, are also being detained here, and that facility holds about 1,800 individuals.
Researchers are also tracking the numbers. Statistics from the Deportation Data Project shows the number of convicted criminals that ICE has arrested here in Michigan during Trump's second term is at 27%, compared to nearly 46% pre-Trump.
It's just a tremendous need, because there's so many people being detained.
Attorneys at Richard Kessler's office are also dealing with an increase of cases of people detained by ICE.
The bulk of the immigration work is helping families stay families in the U.S., right? And that is very rewarding.
Both offices hope their efforts can help people get a fair chance in the legal process.
A bipartisan group of Michigan lawmakers is now pushing a new reform package they say could increase housing supply and lower costs statewide. They also say housing reform begins with reducing zoning barriers and cutting costs so more Michigan families can afford to buy. The Rundown's Mina Fuqua has the story.
Lawmakers say Michigan isn't building enough homes to meet demand, pushing prices higher and locking many families out of the market. So a couple of them put together a 9-bill zoning reform package that they say will expand housing options.
Housing affordability has become a huge issue over the last decade. We're finding that the regulatory burden is very much an issue.
Supporters say reforms are meant to make it easier to build more types of homes, especially for people trying to buy their first home.
At its core, this crisis comes down to supply. We simply are not building enough homes to meet demand.
Housing advocates say first-time homebuyers are feeling the squeeze across many income levels, and they argue statewide zoning changes could help over time.
We're in a housing shortage, which means we're in a housing crisis in Michigan, and that's really impacting first-time homebuyers.
Lawmakers pushing the package say this approach isn't about more subsidies. It's about removing barriers, they say, making housing difficult, expensive, or even illegal to build in some communities.
We cannot subsidize our way out of this housing crisis.
The bills are expected to move to committee soon, where lawmakers will debate how these changes can impact local communities.
Just ahead, President Donald Trump's so-called Board of Peace just met for the first time. Plus, our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic will be here for you with a look at the latest from Lansing. That's coming up right after the break. For Republicans running for governor of Michigan in the next election, there's one big endorsement that's coveted over the rest. Our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic is here for you with a report on candidates trying to get Donald Trump's attention and if it's still worth it.
In the Republican primary for governor in Michigan, the endorsement of President Donald Trump is being sought. In 2022, when the president endorsed Tudor Dixon in the Republican primary, she won the nomination, only to lose by 11 points to Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer. Those election results revealed that many independent voters they didn't like the president, and therefore they did not vote for Ms. Dixon. So the question is now, do candidates such as Mike Rogers, running for the U.S. Senate, and the 8 candidates running for governor, do they have to move away from Mr. Trump's endorsement, if they get it, in order to run in the general election in November, when Republicans are not the only ones voting? Michigan pollster Richard Zuba says this is a problem.
And Republicans have a really difficult time shedding kind of that primary albatross and pivoting to independence in the general election.
But Republican governor candidate Mike Cox welcomes the president's blessing and doesn't see the need to pivot.
And if you got the endorsement, would you have to change colors in order to run in a general election? No.
However, this former Republican candidate for governor, Kevin Rinke, has a different take.
Republicans will lose in Michigan every time unless they can attract independent voters.
Republicans such as State Republican Party Chair Jim Runstead argue that by the time November rolls around, the president's policies will have turned the economy around and his job approval numbers will increase, thus eliminating this endorsement issue, which Mr. Zuba describes today this way.
I do think a Trump endorsement in a general is a problem for Republicans.
Who replaces Governor Whitmer is riding on the outcome of this debate. Here for you in Lansing, Tim Skubic.
Tim also talked about Republicans seeking the president's endorsement with the rundown's Kirk Montgomery, as well as the passing of Jesse Jackson and the connection the civil rights icon had with Michigan.
It's time now to get updated on Michigan politics, and as you know, there is nobody better than our own Tim Skubic. And Tim, the Reverend Jesse Jackson recently died, 84 years old, 2 runs for president, world known, but he also had a connection to Michigan. Tell us more about that.
Well, this is a very interesting story. There was somebody who lived in Lansing, Michigan, who was very close to Jesse Jackson. That gentleman's name was Joel Ferguson. They were like this. And Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Jackson, along with other members who were the civil rights movement, came into Michigan in the presidential primary in 1988. They had what they called a closed-door caucus to pick the nominee. Now, at the time, the popular choice among organized labor and the regular Democrats was Michael Dukakis, the governor of Massachusetts. He was going to get the nomination as a result of winning Michigan. Well, guess what? Joel Ferguson, Jesse Jackson came into Lansing for the caucus, and they beat Michael Dukakis, 54% of the caucus vote to 29% for Mr. Dukakis. Now, of course, Mr. Jackson did not get the nomination eventually long term, but he made a statement, and his relationship to Mr. Ferguson and to Michigan in general was very, very warm. For example, when Aretha Franklin died, he attended the funeral on behalf of the family and spoke. He was an orator. He was a civil rights advocate. He worked with Martin Luther King Jr., and his relationship to Michigan was warm and fuzzy. And lots of people are just shaking their heads on this loss because it was a great one. But Mr. Jackson was well known, let's put it that way, in our state politically and otherwise.
Hey, also, listen, earlier we saw you report on Republican candidates who are really trying to get President Trump's endorsement. What's the latest on that?
You know, this is one of those hot stove league discussions that you have during the winter when you're waiting for spring to show up. Is a Donald Trump endorsement, if you're running for governor or U.S. Senate, worth anything? And the answer is yes and maybe no. It's a definite yes. It is solid gold. If you're running in a Republican primary for governor, you get the Donald Trump endorsement in the primary where only Republicans are voting, but then you have to turn around and run in the general election where there are other folks voting besides Republicans, namely independent voters. So this argument goes back and forth. Jim Runstead, who is the Republican Party chair, this is his take. He says, look at Skubic, long term, this president is going to become more popular because his economic policies over the months are going to get stronger and better, and people are going to see more money in their pockets. And if indeed that happens, he says, Donald Trump will not be an albatross. He'll be a huge pot of gold that will deliver the next Republican governor for the state of Michigan.
Ahead on the rundown, the President's Board of Peace is talking about redeveloping Gaza, but not everyone likes it. We'll break it down. And later, some lawmakers want to change presidential pardon powers in response to President Trump's actions. So stay right there. We'll be right back. Representatives from 40 countries were in Washington, D.C. on Thursday for the first meeting of President Donald Trump's Board of Peace. The board's stated goal is to rebuild Gaza after more than 2 years of war. Our Washington correspondent, Vinay Simlot, has the details.
We're talking about reconstructing Gaza.
The plan to rebuild Gaza in 3 years, unveiled by President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner last month, would turn Gaza into a transportation hub with coastal tourism. Israel's foreign minister says he supports it.
The security, stability, and prosperity of all depend on it.
The White House says President Trump's Board of Peace would oversee Gaza reconstruction, celebrating $5 billion pledged for the project. But the United Nations estimates rebuilding the territory will cost at least $70 billion. And the UK's foreign secretary says standing in the way of reconstruction, there's still violence in the Gaza Strip, even with a ceasefire in place.
Hamas has continued to attack Israeli forces. and over 600 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since the ceasefire began.
And President Trump's Board of Peace does not include major U.S. allies. The president revoked Canada's invitation after Prime Minister Mark Carney's statements opposing U.S. tariffs. France, Germany, and Italy have not agreed to join, and the Vatican rejected an invitation, arguing the UN should manage this crisis.
The old ways were not working. Colleagues, the board is not talking, it's doing.
Well, still to come, the president issued several pardons over the past year, but some lawmakers say they were just rewards for certain allies of the president. That story when the Capitol Rundown returns. A new effort on Capitol Hill would give Congress veto power over presidential pardons. Our Washington correspondent Margaret Chadbourne reports.
Former NFL players, reality TV stars, January 6 rioters, and politicians. President Trump has granted clemency or issued pardons more than 1,600 times since the start of his second term. Sometimes his decisions surprise even members of his own party and receive backlash from Democrats.
It really feels like a perversion of what was meant to be a tool of justice and mercy. Instead, we're seeing those who are wealthy and well-connected get these pardons.
Congressman Johnny Olszewski, a Democrat from Maryland, is leading an effort to enact a constitutional amendment that would give Congress the right to review presidential pardons.
It's a very high bar for overturning pardons.
The amendment would create a process where 20 House members and 5 senators could force a vote on nullifying a presidential pardon, which would then need a 2/3 majority vote in both chambers within 60 days.
This doesn't end pardons. This just gives Congress the ability to review them and to overturn them if they're especially egregious.
Although the Pardon Integrity Act has yet to gain traction in Congress, Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, who is set to retire at the end of his current term, recently signed on as a Republican co-sponsor.
I think that having this be a bipartisan measure, especially in this polarized political environment, is critical.
President Trump's critics say he's issuing pardons to those who want access. The Trump team says the president is helping those who have been prosecuted for political reasons, and all pardons go through White House lawyers.
The president is exercising his constitutional authority to grant clemency requests, and the president and the White House have a very thorough examination of every pardon request that comes to the president's desk.
In order to pass, a constitutional amendment requires 2/3 majorities in both chambers, and it must be ratified by 38 states, making this effort a long shot. In Washington, Margaret Chadbourne.
And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.